I wasn't their grandmother anymore. I was their schedule. That's the thing nobody tells you when your children grow up and have children of their own. Nobody warns you that love, real unconditional love, can be mistaken for availability. That showing up once becomes showing up always. That saying yes 3 times means you're never allowed to say no. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I am 64 years old. I live alone in a townhouse in Guelph, Ontario. I have a garden out back where I grow tomatoes every summer, a cat named Biscuit who sleeps at the foot of my bed, and a life that I had carefully, quietly rebuilt after my husband Dennis passed away 4 years ago. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine, or it used to be. It started the way these things always start, gradually, and then all at once. My son Owen and his wife Tamsin moved back to Ontario from Vancouver the year after Dennis died. Owen said it was for work, a promotion at the engineering firm he'd been with for 6 years. But I think, somewhere in the back of his mind, he believed he was coming home to take care of me. That was Owen's way. He was the kind of man who arrived with solutions before anyone had named the problem. Tamsin was different. Tamsin arrived with a list. She was sharp, competent, and efficient, in the way that made you feel slightly disorganized, just standing next to her. She managed her household the way some people manage corporations. She had a color-coded calendar on the kitchen wall. She meal prepped on Sundays. She signed her children up for swimming lessons, French tutoring, and something called creative movement before they were old enough to tell her what they wanted. She was not cruel. I want to be clear about that. Tamsin Price was not a cruel woman. She just never considered that other people had boundaries until those boundaries showed up between her and what she needed. And what she needed, it turned out, was me. Their 2 children were 4-year-old Felix and 18-month-old Ruby. Felix was all limbs and questions, the kind of child who narrated his own life in real time. Ruby was still new to walking, still discovering that the world was full of objects she could put in her mouth. They were both wonderful. Loud and exhausting, and wonderful. I loved them completely. I think that's what made everything so much harder to see. The first time Tamsin called to ask if I could take Felix for the afternoon, I said yes without hesitating. Of course I did. She had a dental appointment and Owen was in meetings until 6. It made sense. It was practical. It was exactly the kind of thing grandmothers do. The second time was a Thursday morning, 3 weeks later. Could I come over early because the cleaning service was coming, and Ruby was cranky, and it would just be easier if I was there? I said yes again. I brought muffins from the bakery on Aramosa Road. Ruby cried when I tried to hold her, and then fell asleep in my arms 20 minutes later, which felt like winning something. By the 3rd month, I wasn't being asked anymore. I was being informed. Mum, we need you Tuesday and Wednesday this week. Tamsin's back to back. Mum, can you do the school pickup on Friday? I've got a site visit in Kitchener. Mum, would you be okay sleeping over Thursday night? We have an early flight to Toronto for the conference. I noticed at some point that the word please had disappeared from these conversations, and the word thank you had become much rarer. What replaced them was an assumption so comfortable and so settled that it had become invisible to everyone except me. The assumption that I would be there, that I was, in some fundamental way, simply available. I tried to tell myself it was love. That being needed was a form of being loved. And maybe it was, in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like love and started feeling like a job I'd never applied for. The Tuesday that changed things was in October. The maples along my street were already going orange. I remember that because I had been planning to take a long walk that afternoon, just me and the autumn light and no particular place to be. I had been looking forward to it the way you look forward to things when you don't have many things to look forward to anymore. My phone rang at 9:10 in the morning. It was Owen. Mum, Tamsin's in back-to-back calls until 4 and the school called. Felix has a headache and needs to be picked up. Can you go? Like, now? I stood in my kitchen with my coat already on for my walk and I said, I was just heading out, Owen. And there was a pause. A pause so slight that someone else might not have noticed it. But I noticed it because I was his mother, and I had been noticing his pauses since he was 8 years old and trying to convince me he hadn't eaten the last of the biscuits. It's just, he's sitting in the office, Mum. He can't. Stay there. I went. Of course I went. He was 4 years old and sitting in a school office with a headache. But I drove the whole way there with something cold sitting in my chest, something I couldn't yet name. I named it 3 weeks later, at Owen and Tamsin's kitchen table, when Tamsin handed me a printed weekly schedule. It was color-coded, like the calendar on the wall. Monday and Wednesday afternoons were highlighted in yellow. Felix pickup, Ruby nap routine. Friday mornings were in green, school drop-off, plus stay until noon. Thursday evenings were in blue, overnight as needed. There was a small asterisk at the bottom. The asterisk said, "Thanks so much. This really helps our flow." I stared at that schedule for a long time. Long enough that Tamsin eventually said, "Is something wrong with the font?" She was trying to be funny, I think. Or maybe she genuinely thought that was the only possible objection. I said, "Tamsin, did you make this without asking me?" She tilted her head slightly. "Well, it's basically what you've already been doing, just written down so we're all on the same page." "But you didn't ask me." "I mean," she glanced toward the hallway as if Owen might appear and help her. "He didn't. We just thought it would be helpful to have a system." A system. I was the system. I folded the schedule in half and set it on the table and said I'd look it over. I didn't say what I was actually thinking, which was, I have spent 40 years being someone's system. I was Dennis's system when he got sick. I was Owen's system when he was growing up. I am Biscuit's system for his 7 a.m. feeding. But I thought when I turned 60 I might get to be a little less systematic. I thought I might get to be, occasionally, a person. I drove home and I didn't say any of that. I just thought it very loudly the entire way down Stone Road. The conversation I had that evening was not with Owen or Tamsin. It was with my friend Audrey Lamb, who I've known since our children were in kindergarten together. Audrey is the kind of person who will tell you the truth even when you're not ready to hear it, and who will make you tea while she's doing it. I showed her the schedule on my phone. I'd taken a photo of it before I left. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "Gloria, this is a work rota." Gloria, that's my name. Gloria Marsh. "I know," I said, "they've given you a work rota, without a salary, or a thank you, or, apparently, a conversation." Because that's what I'd been telling myself. Tamsin works full-time and Owen's project is, Gloria. Audrey put her hand on my arm. Lots of people are overwhelmed. They don't all hand their mothers a color-coded schedule. I went home that night and I sat with Biscuit in my lap and I let myself feel the thing I'd been not feeling for 4 months. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was grief. Grief for the version of this I'd imagined. The one where I dropped in when I chose to, where I was a grandmother and not a logistical solution, where Felix and Ruby would remember me as the woman who showed up with muffins and stories. Not the woman who was simply always there because no one had ever thought to check if she wanted to be. I didn't say anything to Owen and Tamsin that week, or the week after. But I started to notice things, little things that I had been explaining away for months. The way Tamsin would sometimes speak to Owen about pickup arrangements while I was sitting in the same room, as though I were a fixed piece of furniture they were scheduling around. The way Owen never asked how I was doing anymore, not really. He'd say, "You doing okay, Mom?" in the same breath as, "So can you do Thursday?" As though my answer to one depended on my answer to the other. And then there was the Tuesday in November when I canceled. I had a doctor's appointment. A real one. Not an emergency, but a follow-up from some blood work in September. The kind of appointment you wait 6 weeks for and cannot simply reschedule. I called Owen the night before to let him know. "Mom, we've got nobody else for Ruby." "I have a doctor's appointment, Owen. I made it weeks ago." "Can you not rebook?" I sat very still on my end of the phone. "Can I not rebook my doctor's appointment? It's just this once." "You're asking me to cancel a medical appointment so I can babysit." There was a long silence. Then he said, "I wouldn't put it like that. How would you put it?" He didn't have an answer. I went to my appointment. I told Owen to call a neighbor, or Tamsin's mother who lived 40 minutes away in Oakville, or a registered childcare service, or any of the other arrangements that exist in the world for exactly these situations. But when I arrived home that evening, I found a message on my phone. Not from Owen. From Tamsin. It wasn't long. 6 sentences. The gist of it was that I had put them in a difficult position, and that she hoped I understood the impact on the children's routine, and that she thought we all needed to have a chat about expectations going forward. I read it twice. Then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened my laptop and I started to look at flights. I had been thinking, for years, about Tofino. My friend Audrey had gone 2 summers ago and came back talking about it in the way people talk about places that changed something in them. The rainforest, the fog, the Pacific in October, wild and gray and enormous. I had a photograph of it saved in a folder on my desktop, behind the folders for tax documents and Owen's birthday photos. I had opened that folder more times than I cared to admit. I booked a cabin. 10 days in January. Tofino, British Columbia. I did not tell Owen. I did not tell Tamsin. I told Audrey, who cried a little, and then immediately started looking up restaurants she wanted me to try. I want to be honest about what I felt in the days after I booked that trip. I felt guilty. Not a small amount, a considerable amount. I lay awake 2 nights running, thinking about Felix asking where Grandma was, about Ruby's face when I picked her up, about Owen having to scramble. I almost canceled it twice. What stopped me was the color-coded schedule. I had kept the photo of it on my phone. I looked at it on both of those nights, and both times it reminded me. I had not been asked. I had been assigned. There is a difference, and it matters. I also thought about Dennis. He died before we got to do most of the things we'd talked about doing together. The Nova Scotia road trip. The bed and breakfast in the Okanagan. Tofino. Specifically, which he'd mentioned once at the end of a long summer evening when the yard was still warm, and the kids next door were running through a sprinkler, and the whole world felt like it had slowed down to let us breathe. He'd said, "We should go out there sometime, before we run out of someday." We ran out of someday. He was gone 14 months later. I was not going to run out of someday again. I told Owen on a Thursday evening in December, 3 weeks before my departure. I sat down at his kitchen table, the same table where Tamsin had handed me the schedule, and I said, "I want to let you know I'm going away in January. I'll be in Tofino for 10 days. Owen blinked. Tofino? Yes. When in January? I told him the dates. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mum, those are the weeks Tamsin's doing her recertification course." "I know," I said. "We were counting on you." "I understand. That's why I'm telling you now, so you have 3 weeks to make other arrangements." He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was a teenager, and I told him something he didn't want to hear. Slightly wounded, slightly disbelieving, as though he'd been counting on me to change my mind. I didn't change my mind. Tamsin did not take the news quietly. There was a phone call 2 days later that lasted 22 minutes, most of which involved her explaining to me how difficult January was going to be, and how she'd genuinely been counting on my support, and how she wasn't sure I understood the full scope of what we're managing. She wasn't yelling. Tamsin rarely yelled. She was worse than that. She was disappointed in me. Calmly, efficiently, thoroughly disappointed. I listened to all of it. And when she was finished, I said, "Tamsin, I love you, and I love my grandchildren. But I haven't had a holiday since Dennis died. I'm going to Tofino, and I hope we can talk properly when I get back." She said, "I think there are some things we need to sort out before you leave." I said, "I think there are some things we need to sort out when I come back. I'll be in a better position to have that conversation after some rest." And then I said goodbye, and I hung up. I packed a small bag, 1 checked case, my walking boots, Dennis's old waterproof jacket, the green one from Emmy's that still smelled a little like him when I first took it out of the wardrobe, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read for a year, a good travel mug, my camera. I drove to Pearson, and I boarded a plane. Owen called me twice before I boarded. I let both go to voicemail. I listened to them in the gate area. The first one was frustrated and clipped. When was I going to sort out a proper solution for the kids? Did I understand how stressful this was for them? The second one was softer. He said, "Mum, I hope you have a nice time. I think we've all been doing our best, and it would be good to talk when you're back." He paused. Then he said, "We miss you when you're not here. We do." I sat with that for a while. Then I boarded my plane. Tofino in January was exactly what I needed it to be. Cold, mostly. The kind of cold that is clean rather than bitter, that smells like ocean and wet cedar and something ancient underneath. The cabin I'd rented was small and wood-paneled and had a wood stove that I figured out how to light on the second evening after 2 failed attempts and 1 very helpful YouTube tutorial. I walked every morning on the beach at Chesterman where the surf came in enormous and grey and indifferent to everything happening in Guelph, Ontario. I photographed sea stacks and kelp and a single bald eagle sitting on a driftwood log like he was posing for something. I slept 9 hours the first night. I hadn't slept 9 hours in 4 years. I called Audrey every other evening from the chair by the wood stove. I told her about the humpback whale I'd seen from the headland trail, about the bowl of chowder at the place she'd recommended, which was, in fact, as good as she'd promised. About the afternoon it rained so hard that I stayed in with my book for 6 hours and felt not one single gram of guilt about it. I also, on the third day, allowed myself to cry. Properly, not the managed kind I'd been doing since Dennis's funeral. I sat on the beach with the rain coming sideways and I cried for Dennis and for the Sundays we were supposed to have, and for the grandmother I'd wanted to be, and the grandmother I'd somehow become. I cried until I was empty, and then I watched a wave break and I breathed out for what felt like the first time in a very long time. Owen texted on day 4. "Hope you're okay. Kids are fine. Don't worry about us." A pause, then a second text. "Ruby said Baba today. We think she meant you." I sat with my phone for a long time. Then I wrote back, "That's her first word for me. Tell her Baba will be back soon." On day 7, something shifted. I wasn't sure what it was at first. A lightness, maybe. A sense of my own outline coming back. I had spent so many months being arranged and scheduled and relied upon that I had, somewhere along the way, stopped being able to feel the edges of myself. Stopped knowing where my life ended and their needs began. In Tofino, I remembered, I was not simply a grandmother. I was a woman. A 64-year-old woman who had raised a son alone after his father got sick, who had held Dennis's hand for the last 14 months of his life, who had learned to live alone without being asked if she wanted to, who had plans and preferences, and a garden and a cat and a folder of saved photographs of places she had not yet been. I deserved to be asked, not assigned. I came home on a Sunday evening in late January. The drive from the airport to Guelph was dark and quiet. The streets were iced over in that thin, careful way they get in January, and every porch light I passed looked warm and slightly forgiving. Owen came over on Monday. Not Tamsin, just Owen. He brought coffee from the cafe I like on Wyndham Street. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, and he looked, for a moment, like he was 12 years old and not sure how to begin. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "Good," I said. "So have I." He rubbed the back of his neck the way Dennis used to do when he was working up to something difficult. "Mum, I think I have been treating you like you were just always going to be there. Like you didn't have your own life." I didn't rush in to reassure him. I let it sit. "You do have your own life," he said. "Dad's gone, and you've rebuilt that completely, on your own, and you've been there for us every time we needed you. And somewhere along the way we stopped seeing the difference between you being generous and you being obligated." I felt the tightness in my throat that comes before tears. "Owen, I'm sorry, Mum. I'm genuinely sorry. Tamsin and I talked for a long time while you were away. She's not great at admitting when she's overstepped, but she knows. She told me to tell you she wants to talk. When you're ready." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Outside, the garden was buried in snow, the tomato stake sticking up bare and pale. By May, I thought, it'll be green again. "I love you," I said, "and I love Felix and Ruby more than they'll probably ever understand. But I'm not a service, Owen. I'm your mother. There's a difference." He nodded. He didn't try to argue or explain. He just nodded. "I want to help you," I said, "when I can and when I choose to. Not because I've been put on a schedule. Not because it's assumed. I want to be asked. I want to be thanked. I want to occasionally say no and have that be all right." "It's all right," he said. "I mean it, Mum. It's all right." We sat there for a while after that, not talking, just sharing the coffee and the quiet. Through the window, a cardinal landed on the snow-covered feeder at the edge of the garden, the red of him so bright against all that white it almost didn't seem real. Tamsin and I had our conversation a week later. It was not easy. Tamsin does not do easy. But it was honest, which is better. She told me she hadn't thought about it from my perspective. She said the word, assumed, the way people say it when they're realizing, for the first time, that it contains the word ass. She apologized, and it cost her something, and I received it accordingly. Things changed after that. Not overnight, and not perfectly. Owen still sometimes called without thinking, and I sometimes had to remind him. But the color-coded schedule was never mentioned again. Tamsin started asking, at least a few days in advance. And when I said I had plans, she said, "Of course, no problem," and meant it. The spring after, I took a long weekend in Prince Edward County with Audrey. We drank wine and looked at art and ate at a farmhouse restaurant where everything on the menu had grown within 10 kilometers of the table. And when I came home, there was a drawing on my front doorstep. Crayon on construction paper, the edges wavy, the colors slightly outside the lines. 2 figures, a tall one and a small one, holding hands. Above them, in Felix's unmistakable printing, "Grandma and me." I unlocked my door. Biscuit wound around my ankles. The garden was just starting to come up green. I put the drawing on the fridge, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like exactly where I was supposed to be.